All right. Okay. Well, I'm going to make a start, everybody. And as I said, there'll be a few minutes at the end if you do have any questions. But just to let you know, I'm recording this session. So if you'd rather have your camera off, then of course that's absolutely fine and up to you. Um, so this session is called From Micro to Macro, exploring the drama curriculum from a social justice perspective. And I really want to thank you all for coming and listening to these ideas. And I hope you enjoy the session. And if you don't already, then perhaps we might continue the conversation on Twitter afterwards. And I've got my Twitter handle there on screen. I also just want to say a massive thank you to Emma Kell, who I think is just, an amazing tour de force for organising this and for letting me be a part of it. So thank you to Emma. My name is, of course, Daniel Langley. I currently work as subject leader for drama and faculty leader for performing arts at a school in Buckinghamshire. I work as a moderator and examiner for Educast Drama, and I also work as a specialist leader in education for drama through an institution called the Astra Alliance. And throughout this talk, I'm going to essentially focus on three main themes. First of all, I'm going to unpack a technique called micro macro, which is by the Paper Birds Theatre Company, and I'll talk about them more in a moment. And they're an incredible company. They sometimes call the technique split stage, but I'm going to stick to micro macro because I don't want us to get confused with a different technique, sometimes called cross-cutting, which it can also be called split stage. So I'm going to stick to micro macro. I'm then going to talk briefly about how I've applied this technique just beyond the place that I found it, the way that I originally applied it, just across various schemes of work in the drama curriculum in my school, and then how I believe this technique can help us make connections kind of more broadly amongst different subjects that our students are studying. Okay, so first of all, the Paper Birds. I'm sure you may know them. If you don't, I really encourage you to follow them on Twitter, go to their website, and of course, see their live productions too. They're absolutely fantastic. They're a devising theatre company. They have a strong social and political agenda. And the reason why I like the Paper Birds so much is because they use verbatim, the technique of using kind of real world dialogue, usually collated and collected through interviews from real people and put word for word within the production. And so not only do they want to provoke change, but they do this by amplifying the voices of everyday people. And I think that's what's so inspiring because, often they're the people that don't have a voice. And so the Paper Birds go into a community, they interview people, they take the words of individuals from that community and they layer that within their creative productions. And I think that's really, really powerful, really, really strong. They've also been brilliant throughout the pandemic. In fact, the reason I first came across them was because of this digital workshop series that they created. And I promised Kylie that I'd give them a huge shout out and for these workshops. If you are looking for a practitioner to work with for your students moving forwards and you haven't looked at the Paper Birds before, I really encourage you to head over to their website because they've got an incredible range of resources. And that's really how I first came across this idea of micro macro. Now, why is this important at the moment? Why social justice is so important? Well, I think it's just because at the moment it just feels incredibly current. You only have to listen to or watch the news for a couple of minutes at the moment, and it just feels like every single day there is another case of individuals experiencing injustice for whatever reason, and then another group of people who are essentially causing that injustice. And in my experience, young people, my students, are incredibly engaged with all of these social justice issues, and quite rightly too. And I find that really exciting. And I think that as drama practitioners and as arts practitioners, I think we can really harness that and help young people to shape the passion that they have about these issues. Even just this week, whether it be George Floyd or Dominic Cummings, or in fact the climate crisis, I think is a huge one. It's an incredible energy to harness in drama lessons. Now, moving on to the actual technique of micro macro. The reason why I like this technique so much is because it allows students to explore social justice issues from two different perspectives, and question how and why and who did what to cause a particular event or injustice to happen, or to take action against an injustice. So to break it down, first of all, you have the micro perspective, the smaller of the two, which represents the individual. So from the micro perspective, students can question, what role does the individual play in the events that have taken place? So if we focus on a particular character within a play or an individual from the real world, we might question how their actions, their opinions, and the role that they play within the event contributed to the injustice or the reparation for that injustice which has taken place. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have the macro perspective, the larger, the wider view. And this often represents society, or other forces within the world within which all of those individuals are operating. And it allows us to question the extent to which those individuals are actually simply reacting to or being provoked by outside influences. And so our students can often move between those two perspectives and, of course, deepen their understanding of a particular event that took place and who might be responsible for the consequences. So this technique was created by the Paper Birds when they devised their production Broke. And Broke tells the story of Kylie, a real person, one of the artistic directors of the Paper Birds, and her relationship with debt throughout her life. And so when we applied this production to the technique, on the one hand, we see Kylie's inner monologue, her perspective, her relationship with debt. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, the micro view, the individual. And this is delivered on stage by Kylie, talking about her relationships with debt at different ages, at 21, 24, 29, etc. What her personal experience was, why she chose to take on more debt at those particular times in her life, and the impact that that had afterwards. On the other side of the coin, we have the macro perspective, and this was delivered through a presentation looking at the history of the stock market, how debt, the concept of debt was even created, and that goes all the way back to William III, the way in which governments make promises based on borrowing that they're going to do, and the way that those sorts of economic functions have an impact on all of our lives. So by looking at it from these two perspectives, the individual and then the wider societal view, we're asked to question, to what extent is Kylie responsible for her own actions of borrowing money? And to what extent is she the victim of lenders who are taking advantage of her vulnerability? And in a Brechtian fashion, they don't ask us to kind of come up with an answer to this. It might just be that we are pondering this, we are thinking and reflecting on our own relationship with money and or debt. But by moving through those two perspectives, we can kind of think about who is really to blame here, and what responsibility does the individual have compared to the society in which they live. So my students really enjoyed this technique because it's a really simple framework, or not simple, but it is complex, but I would say simple to apply and get their heads around. And so I took it and applied it to other schemes of work within our curriculum. And I'm going to just pick up on two now and tell you how we applied them. So the first one is Blood Brothers by Willy Russell, which perhaps many of you will know, but if you don't, the play stroke musical focuses on Mrs. Johnston, who is seen in the image here, center stage. She comes from a working class background, a poorer background. She has quite a few children, and at the beginning of the production, she finds out that she's pregnant with twins. And we really see her personal dilemma, because she thinks that she won't be able to bring up both children because the father of the children has just walked out, leaving her with these twins plus all the children that she already has. Then an opportunity arises. A wealthy lady that she works for, who can't have children, offers to take on one of the children and bring him up as her own. And throughout the production, we see Edward and Mickey, the two children, growing up. Quite by accident, they become friends, and we see the different lives they have based on the upbringing and the opportunities which they have. Having come from the same place biologically, they have very different opportunities based on the family situation in which they grow up. So in exploring this, throughout particularly the earlier scenes in the production, we might question and look at Mrs. Johnston's personal situation, her personal crisis. I ask students to think about the responsibility that one has for their own children. How much can we blame Mrs. Johnston for the situation that she is in? But then I also present students with the macro story of this, thinking about the Thatcher government, the economic context, and the severe lack of opportunities for young people. When students take that into account, do they still view Mrs. Johnston in the same way? And then by looking at those two perspectives, it influences the way in which they interpret the character of Mrs. Johnston and how she is presented on stage. And I've got this quote here by Willy Russell, who talks about the fact that the failure to succeed in life is not because of a lack of ability, but a lack of opportunity. And students really kind of love having a bit of a debate around that. And it's a great debate to have in the class. You know, is it about opportunities that come from wider society, or does an individual have total control of their destiny? And exploring that through the play has been incredibly interesting for the students. At the other end of the scale, we have Year 13 looking at Accidental Death of an Anarchist by Dario Fo. For those of you who don't know the play, it's a fictional retelling of a real-life story that took place in Italy in 1969. An anarchist rail worker was arrested on suspicion of planting a bomb. Later, 3 days later, he fell from a third-story window of a police station. And Dario Fo uses this play to essentially expose the corruption in the police force and essentially suggest that, in fact, the anarchist Giuseppe Pinelli was murdered and was thrown out of the window. In order to do this, he uses a character called Maniac, because the play is a farce, it's a comedy. The maniac, we see the maniac's individual actions and what he does to try to expose the corruption within the police force. From the macro level, we see the systemic corruption within the police force at the time. And that kind of systemic corruption and inherent bias is something that is really relevant to students and all of us, in fact, at the moment. And so looking at it from these two perspectives has made the play even more relevant. But at the end of the play, Dario Fo gives us a dual ending by which the audience is going to decide which way of two options the play is going to end. And applying this technique to that dual ending has been effective, because what happens is the maniac produces a bomb. He says that what he's going to do to solve this systemic corruption is he's going to destroy the system. He's going to blow up the police station and he's going to kill all of the officers. That's the only way to get rid of the corruption. However, the police come back and say, if you do that, you shouldn't kill us, because if you do that, then you fulfill the destiny, you affirm the accusation that we make of you, that you are nothing more than an anarchist and a terrorist. And so I present students with the question, well, in trying to address the injustice, do you become part of the problem? By taking individual action, does the maniac confirm what the police force have been saying all along, that he is an anarchist and a terrorist for killing the police officers? Or does he solve the problem by killing these police officers because he can never trust a corrupt police force to condemn its own? And we look at whether or not to solve an issue, you might work from within it or outside it. Can it ever be solved from within, or does it always have to be action from without? And so moving between the two perspectives just helps to deepen that understanding. So if this is something that you think you'd be quite interested in, a suggested structure is with a script, just focusing in on one particular character, the protagonist, the individual actions that they take. But then if you don't already, having a look not only at the wider context for pure information, but looking at the influences, the political influences, the social influences, the cultural influences at the time, and our students consider the individual and then that wider context. And the same goes for devising too, depending on what the theme is, what responsibility does each individual have within any given theme or event, and what were the influences happening around the outside that essentially created the justice or injustice at the heart of it. And I've got students at the moment working on issues like the Grenfell Tower disaster, George Floyd and BLM, and this is a really good structure to kind of start unpicking a theme and looking at it from a variety of perspectives. So just to finish up, I am aware of the time, but there are ways to make wider connections for students, particularly sixth form students who may be going to university interviews, who may be doing their UCAS and need to think a little bit beyond just the curriculum that they're studying. As I've been doing this since September, I've kind of made connections to psychology and the nature-nurture debate about particularly growing up. Does the individual take full responsibility, or can they be responsible 100% for their destiny? How much does nurture, does the environment they grew up in have an impact? In terms of economics, the individuals and the state, how much state intervention should there be? In terms of geography and the wider world and the climate crisis, the individual, how much responsibility do they have? The UK, and then how does that play out on the world stage, particularly with events like COP26 coming up? And then in history, when we take a look back and we view individuals from history, can we see them just as perpetrators of actions, or can we actually sometimes flip it on its head and see them as victims of a society in which they were growing? And again, that very much connects with the nature-nurture debate. So there are opportunities within the classroom, within exploring dramatic texts, to kind of bring in ideas from other subjects through this technique too. So I've very quickly gone through the technique, how I've applied it to our curriculum, and how it extends a little bit beyond. So I hope that's been useful. You may want to run away now and grab a cup of tea or coffee, but if anyone does have any questions, I'm very happy for you to just unmute and ask them, or else type them in the chat section. But I'll just say thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. That was amazing.
Thanks, Ida. Thanks for coming along.
That's really useful. Have you, are there any other theatre companies that you found that have that individual, that micro macro thing that's so sort of evident? It is in Paper Birds. I'd not thought of it like that, but it's really true.
Yeah, I don't know. I think...
or is it just a Brechtian thing?
Yeah, well, the thing is, I think when I've taught Brecht in the past, I think I've kind of almost sort of stumbled across this concept, but kind of not known that I was doing it, and would therefore, sometimes sort of talk about it and sometimes not. And I think now I've found this technique, it's kind of almost given me words, or it's given me a way to say a little bit about what we're already doing.
Yeah, I think Judy's just put lung theatre on. Yeah. Oh,
perfect. Okay. I don't know them, so thanks, Judy. I'll take a look.
Yeah, they did very into sort of social justice stuff. Sorry,
they did a really good piece about carers, young carers, didn't they? Giving young carers a voice, and then looking at the whole system around it, that I think did really well at the Edinburgh Fringe.
It was on the radio.
Yeah. Was it?
Yeah, it was stunning.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and it did have individual voices and a story, and then lots of outside, the institution, the schools, social services. Yeah.
That sounds fantastic. Thanks for sharing it. I'll definitely.
They are really worth contacting as well. They're young and passionate, committed. I'm sure they've got a whole learning program as well. But they're very cool, I'd say.
That's brilliant, Judy. Thanks for sharing.
You're welcome.
There's also Clean Break as well. And so This Wide Night, the play that was produced by Clean Break, we used that at A level. And that just, because I've never heard of this. We've looked at paper birds, but I've never really thought about micro macro and relating it to other people. But yeah, you could relate that to the story in This Wide Night. And there's a company called Open Clasp, who are Northeast based. So they're a women's theatre company, and they are very Brechtian and definitely really looking at social issues, very female orientated, domestic abuse and women in the criminal justice system. But it totally looks at this as well. Yeah, brilliant. Dan, what I just missed what age group you would do Blood Brothers with. Do you do that at GCSE or younger?
We do it slightly earlier, so we either do it with year 8 and 9. It depends how they, depending on the specific year group.
Yeah, because we're always looking for engaging year 8 in a bit of a better way.
Yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely. And I think I think what I like about this and sort of the companies that have just been suggested just now that I'm definitely going to look at is it's about relating it to their world, isn't it, and them, and actually saying, what to what extent are you responsible, and to what extent of what's happening to you, and what's happening to you is that responsible, if that makes sense, and because they're within these different systems in the school system, so my students have a lot of opinions about that, as I'm sure your students may do too, and particularly around issues, behavior or whatever it is, or the systems that are in place, or COVID, it's impacting all of their lives, and I think that's what I like about this technique, is that it puts them in it, and all of these companies that we've mentioned, as I said at the start, if they use real voices, then it kind of makes it more real for the students somehow, and I think that can be incredibly engaging.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Lovely.
Thank you very much.
Session. Thank you,
I'm
Dan.
off. See you, Caroline.
See you later, Sina.
Thank you, guys. All the best.
Bye, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take
Bye
care.
now.